All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating piece of analysis from Thorsten Meyer's AI. We are looking at the incredibly complex, high-stakes tension between AI safety, corporate power, and the future of global governance. When we talk about frontier AI, we almost always focus on the technology itself. But today, we're mapping out how the narrative of AI safety is actually fundamentally reshaping power and control in our society. This isn't just about code anymore, folks. It's about who gets to write the rules for our entire future.
To understand this, we have to look at Anthropic's CEO, Dario Amodei. He doesn't just view AI as some new software product. He perfectly captures what you could call a civilizational worldview, describing powerful AI as literally a country of geniuses in a data center. It's a striking image, right? It balances this enormous historic upside, radical advances in medicine, science, and economic production, against unprecedented risks to labor markets, geopolitics, and civil liberties. So this is really a theory of historical transition, not just a standard Silicon Valley business plan.
So, here's our roadmap for exploring the author's critique of this worldview today. We're going to cover 1. The civilizational warning, 2. When AI builds AI, 3. The safety paradox, 4. Building the incumbent moat, 5. The post-labor economy, and finally 6. Governing the future. Okay, part 1. The civilizational warning. Let's start by looking at Anthropic's core doctrine, which is the whole foundation for why they say things need to change immediately.
The source explains a profound problem we are facing right now. AI development is moving exponentially faster than democratic states can legislate. Policy simply moves way too slowly. But the author points out a really dangerous political implication here. If the democratic state is too slow, well then the companies closest to the technology end up defining the reality of the situation for everyone else. They define what the danger is, they define the response, and they alone define what counts as responsible deployment. Essentially, this turns technical urgency into political authority. It means unelected engineers at private companies are making choices that will dictate your daily life.
Moving right along to part 2, when AI builds AI. This acceleration naturally leads to the concept of recursive self-improvement.
Get a load of this striking internal data point from May 2026. Anthropic claims that over 80% of the code merged into their own core codebase was actually authored by their AI, Claude. Think about that for a second. Over 80%. The machine is literally writing the vast majority of the programming for the next version of the machine. AI is no longer just a tool we use, it's becoming the core engine of production for itself.
And this data just paints a staggering picture of acceleration. To put this in perspective, typical engineers were merging 8 times as much code into the final product daily in the second quarter of 2026 compared to 2024. 8 times. Alongside this, an internal poll showed a median 4 times output boost just by using their Mythos preview model. These numbers are undeniably massive and point to a world-altering shift in capabilities.
But here is where the author points out a highly politically loaded dilemma. Notice the flow of information here. The internal models produce the work. Internal employees estimate the productivity boosts. The internal organization interprets those results, and then the public and lawmakers are asked to just accept these claims as the basis for urgent global governance. The critique here isn't necessarily that the claims are false. It's that if the evidence is entirely internal and self-reported by a frontier lab, we have to critically ask who actually gets to write the new global rules based on that evidence.
Which brings us to part 3, the safety paradox. It's one thing to call for government regulation in theory, but it's a whole different ballgame when the state actually steps in. This timeline perfectly captures the contradiction at play. So on June 9th, 2026, Anthropic launched Fable 5 and Mythos 5. They included very strict safety restrictions and data retention policies, essentially inviting government power to help block unsafe deployments. But just 3 days later, on June 12th, the US government broadly suspended access to these models for all foreign nationals, including Anthropic's own foreign employees. Anthropic immediately objected, arguing that the government's process was opaque, lacked nuance, and was technically weak.
The real kicker here is profound. Anthropic wanted a precise, technically grounded government intervention. But national security agencies, they rarely act with the delicate nuance that private tech labs prefer. Once you invite national security agencies to govern frontier models, the safety state you helped build is no longer under your control. It takes on a life of its own.
Let's shift gears to part 4, building the incumbent moat. We are moving from national security to market dynamics now.
Here we look at David Shapira's critique of the safety narrative. The explainer source notes that safeguards like 30-day data retention policies, compute thresholds, and mandatory audits absolutely do reduce real harms, like cyber and biological threats. Nobody is denying that. But look at the market outcome. These safety measures introduce astronomical compliance costs that act like an impenetrable moat. It suddenly becomes nearly impossible for smaller competitors, nimble startups, or open-source ecosystems to even survive in that regulatory environment.
Ultimately, this means that even without a shred of malicious intent from the big labs, responsible AI functionally blocks out the competition. Safety language naturally converts into distribution control, compliance barriers become market barriers, and reputation capital gets hoarded by a small circle of insiders. The very desire to protect the world structurally locks in the current tech giants.
Okay, part 5, the post-labor economy. Now we step away from cyber risks and look at the everyday reality for billions of people, the future of human work.
Dario Amodi has suggested that in a post-labor world where AI does all the heavy lifting, people will still find deep meaning in relationships, creativity, and play. And that sounds great, right? But the author challenges us to look past just the spiritual or emotional meaning of work. Work is also your income. It's your bargaining power in society. The much harder economic question we have to ask is, who actually controls the wealth and the productivity when AI fully displaces labor? How will you afford your living when a machine takes over your job?
This comparison breaks down the post-labor divide perfectly. On one side, we see Anthropic's focus, meaning, hobbies, and philanthropy. But on the other side are the really hard, unanswered economic questions: taxation, antitrust, data rights, and public compute. The critic argues that a world where humans are spiritually fulfilled but completely economically dependent on a few AI landlords isn't a successful transition at all. As the author bluntly puts it, that is just techno-feudalism with better therapy.
And finally, part 6, governing the future. We need to zoom out and see how these AI safety frameworks are reshaping global power structures as we know them.
The source warns that focusing entirely on this risk frame tends to elevate private labs into civilizational guardians. When you look at the scope of this, industrial policy, security, labor, geopolitics, market structure, you realize that AI safety is absolutely not just a technical software issue anymore. It's a massive blueprint for geopolitical strategy. The debate over AI safety is, at its core, a debate over power distribution across the entire globe.
The core argument here is that we have to refuse to collapse the debate into these two bad options. We can't solely trust the labs, whose governance is naturally driven by their own self-interest and internal data. But as the Fable and Mythos incident showed us, simply trusting the state leads to opaque, blunt national security orders. Actually, scratch that. We don't have to choose between those two. The author argues we desperately need a better standard: independent audits, transparent methodologies, clear due process, and rigorous antitrust scrutiny.
I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. AI is accelerating. The risks are absolutely real, and our institutions are frankly unprepared. But because the future is a legitimacy problem, not just a technical debugging problem, we are the ones who have to decide who gets to control it. And one thing is certain from this analysis: true democratic legitimacy cannot simply be self-improved inside a private lab. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this gives you a completely new lens through which to view the headlines.